It's Friday Night Photoshop. Hi everyone, I'm Mike Leonard. Tonight we're going to be doing some review items, things that we've talked about in the past. And among the items I plan to talk about will be focus stacking, HDR, that's not high definition, that's high dynamic range, stitching, and we're going to do some gray digging. We haven't done that in a while. And then we're going to do some discovering color casts and some more. Let's get started. So in no particular order, I'm going to talk about how can we determine if there's a color cast in an image. Well, this image almost looks black and white, and you might be content with just the way that it looks. But if we don't have a calibrated monitor, and if you don't have a keen eye, and maybe you've had cataract surgery recently, and all of a sudden all the colors that you're used to are no longer familiar to you. So how can we tell if there's a color cast in an image? Here's a quick way to do it. All I need to do is pull up the rectangular marquee tool and just draw a box anywhere in the scene. And I'm going to go and do Control U. Now by making a box, I've just made a selection. Now what I'm going to do is just come over here and desaturate this. That means I'm going to remove all the color inside the box. And if we see a difference between the outside of the box and the inside of the box, then we have a color cast. So watch this. I just brought that down. Does anybody think that this looks yellow in here?
Yep.
Well, truth be known, that's not yellow. Your eyes have just gotten used to adjusting to thinking that this out here is black and white. This is true black and white.
Hmm.
So yes, there is a color cast. That's the answer to this. If I was going to tip the entire image to black and white, well, it's going to look like this. So if you're not sure if there's a color cast in an image or not, here's a quick way to do it. Now, if you'd like to know what color it is, if I take this saturation and move it up, well, there's the giveaway. So this is very blue. So what can we do about that? We can go gray digging. So when we talk about a shade of gray, we're talking about having an equal amount of the colors red, blue, and green. So if I pull up Control L, and if I take this middle eyedropper for the mid-range and just go start clicking around the image, I want to click on something that I know is neutral. Now, the hull of this boat looks pretty white. So this one here looks pretty gray. So does that one. I could take any one of these. We usually don't want to go with something bright white or anything that's all black. So we need something in the middle. So I'm going to say that this boat here is gray. And if I click on that, look at what happened. I've just removed the color cast. And this is more true to form of how this scene looked. Now, your eyes are probably playing games on you right now. You're probably looking at this and saying, wow, this looks so orange. Well, what's the opposite of blue? It is orange. It's yellow. And so your eyes have this amazing ability to do color corrections for you, but that's not always to your interest, because when you go to make a print, and then when you look at that print, now you get to look at it under a full spectrum light. Ideally a cloudy day is where I like to look at prints. It's going to look a little more accurate to what you see on your monitor, and this presupposes that you have calibrated your monitor. That's something everybody should do at least once.
Mike, if you repeat the selection and change the saturation, should nothing happen now?
If I agree to this, and now if I go back to Control U, and if I just bring up the saturation, you'll notice some of this is going blue, but where I just did that little click, that's still gray. And if I were to go and do this box, let's just try that box relatively like where I did it before, right? And I'll just go do the Control U, and let me desaturate this. Yeah, it's a minor difference, but it's nothing like it was. Can you see that?
Yeah, can you use that as a way to verify that you actually found a gray?
Yes, absolutely. Why not? So now let's just do some more gray digging and prove the point. If I go do another Control L, when I take this eyedropper, what I'm doing, wherever I click, it's going to take the red, the green, and the blue value, and it's going to specifically measure the green value, and it's going to either add red or remove red, or add blue or remove blue to make it equal green. Let me just go see if I can find something here real quick. Is it F8? Yeah. So I've just pulled out this little indicator that tells me the red, the green, and the blue values for wherever I move my cursor. And if I move it over here, over this red part of this buoy, well, you'll see that the red value is much higher. You can see that. I wish I could make it bigger. I can't. But the red value there is 162. Green is 128, and blue is 114. Now we do have a blue barrel over here, so if I go and put this over the blue is naturally going to be a higher value. See, the blue is 138, the green's 117, and the red is 104. I think this bucket down here looks a little bit green. And sure enough, that confirms it, not by much, but it's 128 for the green. Now, if I were to go and click on one of these colors, it's going to adjust the red and the blue value to make that as gray as it can be. So here I'm hovering over this red part of this little buoy, and we can see up there's more red. And if I just simply click here, now look at that. The red, the green, and the blue values are all identical. 136 for red, green, and blue. That's just where my cursor is. And if I move this away, you're going to say that still looks a little red, but it's just because your eyes are so used to, you're seeing all this blue around. If I go click on the blue, what's the opposite of blue? It's going to be orange or yellow, right? So if I click down here, the whole image is going to look orange. And if I click down here on this green, the opposite of green is magenta, right? So that's, does that not look a little pinkish?
What happens if you click on the white?
Now, if I click on the white, like the hull here, this is going to assume that to be white. And you see that the red, the green, the blue values, they're all 180. And if I come back to this hull where I was, that's pretty close, 136, 137, 133. And if I click there, it just balanced all of them to be 135. So we can go grave digging in a scene if there is something that's colorless. Now, what do you look for if you don't have a gray card that somebody's conveniently holding up in the scene? Well, I look for tires on a car, because usually those are colorless. I look at shingles on a roof. I'll look for asphalt, so long as it's not in Utah, because they get all this red rocks out there and they grind that up, and your highways out there look kind of a brownish, tannish, reddish color. So it won't work there. I will look for anything that has no color in it. And if I use this little eyedropper to go and basically re-white balance is what I'm doing, I'm then getting the color cast out of the scene, and the colors should look a little bit better. Now, in all this time that we've been looking at this image, and let me just put this away and say, okay, when we first started, you probably thought that this was pretty neutral. Right now, when you look at it, do you think it looks neutral now? Truth is, I removed a lot of blue. And so this is more of an image that doesn't have a color cast now. So again, the trick here is to just draw a box over some part of the scene. Obviously, if it's going to be a scene that's got a bright, sunny blue sky day, that's not going to work. You got to find something in the scene that is neutral. And then if you want to see if it's got the color cast, make a selection, do a Control U, and then play with the saturation. Bring it up, bring it down, and see if you notice a big difference. And then you can go do the Control L, grab that middle eyedropper, and go click on whatever you think it is that's neutral, and it should apply it to the entire scene. Now, Control L isn't the only place we can do this. We can do this in Adobe Camera Raw. There's a little eyedropper there that you can go and do the exact same thing. And the beauty of doing this in RAW is you've got some more controls. For instance, I think the white here is a little bit blown out. So if I did this in RAW, then I could probably tone that down pretty easily just by moving the white slider down or the highlights down. So we're going to take a look at stitching now. And how is this going to work? Well, when we go out to take the picture, we need to have a couple of considerations. What we need to do is we ideally would like to shoot in a vertical orientation like this, portrait mode. And you'll notice that what I did was I just simply took the camera and I just moved over a little bit, and you can see how I'm overlapping. You see the bridge that's in the scene there. Now the bridge is pretty much in the middle, and that's where I ended this. So I would like to get this entire scene of this harbor all into one frame. So to do that, I'm simply going to open them all up in Adobe Camera Raw. Now, if these were JPEGs, I could select them all in Bridge and do a Control R, and that'll open them all up into Adobe Camera Raw, just like what we're seeing here. So once this is open, you'll see down here that we've got the different frames. Took a little bit for that to pop up there. So what I need to again do is to select all of these. So the first one selected, see the white box around it? If I just do a Shift and then click with the mouse, I've now selected this one. See, there's white boxes. There are boxes around all of them. The first one you'll notice is a little whiter than the rest. It's just because we're previewing that one up here. Now, if I right-click anywhere in these images, I have the choice to say Merge to Panorama. Now, again, the reason why we want to do a vertical shot is so that we don't end up with a panorama that's 40 inches wide by maybe 4 inches tall. By doing this vertical, this is going to give us a little more top to bottom. And it's okay if we have to take 5 images to include the entire scene. We could do 12 images. We could do 15 images. Photoshop doesn't really care. The one limitation is going to be what RAM you have in your computer and your time, because it's obviously going to take a little more time with more images, and that would only be to be expected. Now we've got different projections here. Spherical and cylindrical would be the two that you're most likely going to be using. Perspective is best if you're scanning something with a flatbed scanner and maybe the entire image or artwork doesn't fit. So you scan a portion of it, then you move it over, you scan a portion of it, and so forth. That's where perspective works really well. But for this, I have a choice, spherical or cylindrical. And let's just go look at spherical. It has to re-render. That's not bad. And cylindrical, that gives me a little more information. So I think I'll go with that. Now, I can do this really cool thing called boundary warp. And look at this, I have scrubbies there too. This will actually take the edges and bend them to fill the area, the available canvas. That might be desirable, but maybe we don't want that. We can also say fill the edges. And what this does is a content-aware fill. And it goes and looks around to see what can we fill in there to make that work. And that's pretty desirable. That looks pretty nice. The other way we can do this is auto crop. And what that's going to do is simply going to crop in to where there is no image, just to give me a plain and basic image. Now, when I do panoramics, I usually anticipate the fact that there's going to be some of the edges cut off. So you're not going to want to do it in such a critical way that important content in the scene goes right to the edge of the photo. Give yourself some leeway, 15% around the edges maybe, not a bad idea. And when you overlap them, you can overlap them as little as a quarter of the image. I like to do a little more. I'll do a third. You could certainly do a half. You could do 75% if you want. You'll just be taking more images, but that all works. What doesn't work is if you get down to around 20%, because then Photoshop has a hard time trying to match things up. By the way, my favorite lens to use for doing these stitching panoramics is my macro lens, my 100mm macro lens. The reason for that is the geometry in that lens is so darn accurate that it doesn't have to bend the image that much, and images go together just so nicely. If you use a real wide-angle lens, you get that barrel distortion. Photoshop does a decent job to put stuff together, but it sometimes doesn't always get it right. That's where it's better to have more shots than fewer shots. So I like this auto crop presentation, so I'm going to say merge. And what this is going to do is it's going to take that and save it as a whole nother file that's a DNG file. Now, a DNG file is a digital negative file. And the beauty of that is it's a RAW file. Now, even if I had JPEG files along the way, this will still convert them to a DNG. You're not going to have the latitude like you would with a normal RAW file if you originate from a JPEG. However, you do have all the services and all the facilities of Adobe Camera Raw here to be able to work on this. And so now if I wanted to just simply warm this up a little, or gee, maybe I go gray digging in here. I grab this little eyedropper, and in here I'd say, well, I think the cement should be gray. So if I click on that, I made a real subtle difference. Maybe I'd like to just try the asphalt, so I'll go click on this. Yeah, that asphalt there was a little bit on the warm side. What if I did the part here that's wet? That's not too bad. I could say, gee, I think the hull of this boat should be white, so if I click over here, see, I can go gray digging around the scene. Oh, here's a roof. This would probably be the best. Yeah, so I just clicked on the roof. And if I look at the before and after here, here's where we started, and here's where we're ending. Very minimal difference because I set the white balance in the camera when I did this initially. Now, if I had shot this in auto white balance, I might have a rainbow of colors here depending upon how the camera adjusted the white balance for each of these images. This is another key reason why we always want to set our white balance, especially if you're doing JPEGs. So there's the image stitched together, and then we can use this image sizing. The native size of this image right now is almost 34 inches by 21 inches. And it's a 63, almost a 64 meg file. That's the other thing. Your megapixels increase because you're adding more pixels. And with this, we could zoom in and do a lot with it. And from here, we would just open this like we would a normal RAW file, and then we'd have all the facilities in Photoshop to do whatever we want, and we could trim it, we could do whatever we need to do in Photoshop, then we would save it. And we'd save it as a Photoshop file, as a TIFF file, and maybe as a JPEG file, depending upon what you need it for. So there's image stitching done the easy way using Adobe Camera Raw originating from Bridge. So let's do this again. I'm going to open up some JPEG files. And this is something I did at the Grand Canyon. And these are JPEGs. They were RAW files, and trust me, they were. And if I just do a Control R, this is going to bring the JPEG into Adobe Camera Raw. Now, as I look at these images, they're pretty flat. That's not too bad. That's not too bad. But this one over here, I got a pretty bad shadow in here. Now, I'd like to lighten this up. But if I lighten this up, it's going to be at the peril of lightening up a lot of stuff unless I were to make a mask. So what I think I'd rather do is let's combine them as is. And you'll also notice the sky looks a little flat too. Well, if I were to say, let's merge these to a panorama, and again, I get to choose either spherical or cylindrical. And in this case, I might just go with spherical just to do something different. And do I want the auto crop? Yeah, let's just keep that on. We'll just keep it simple. And I'm going to say merge this. So I'll say OK, and I'll just say save. Now, once this comes up, now what I can do is, remember how I said the sky looks a little bit flat? Gee, what if I were to come up here and take the linear gradient and say that I'd like it to start right about here and end maybe about down there. And now I'm going to go down and grab the dehaze. And now I can run the dehaze across all three images, just like that. Maybe I'm going to pull this down so I can pull out a little more detail with the dehaze. Now, if I had to go and try and dehaze each of the three images, that could be really tedious. So I don't want to do that. So right here, I'm able to, after I've combined them, I have this facility to be able to do that. And for that dark spot that's down here, I can immediately take the shadows and just move that up. And you see that's affecting the whole image, but that's not maybe so bad because some of the darker areas in the other parts might want to come up. But I can now come back in here, and this time maybe I will do a new mask, and I'll use the brush. And if I just brush this area that I would like to lighten, just like this, now I can go and take just the shadow area and affect just the shadows for that one area. And if I happen to have a stitch going through this, right now the beauty of this is I could be combining both. And look at this, shadowed areas is always going to be cooler. So I would absolutely move the color temperature over just a little bit, like that. And now that's making this look a little bit nicer. I'll even add a little bit of magenta. There we go. So that's a way that you can very nicely put images together and then do the post-processing on it as a composite and not have to do the same thing on each image. So let's do some high dynamic range processing. I have got 7 images that were taken at different exposures. Now, the f-stop should be the same in every one of these. What should be different is the exposure time. And the reason we don't want to affect the f-stop is because that would be changing the depth of field. And we want them all to be the equal sharpness. So just like before, I'm going to choose this entire group. My camera does 7 images. Yours may do more or it may do less. It's just a matter of setting the automatic exposure bracketing in your camera so that it'll take one picture darker, one picture where it would normally take it, and then one picture brighter. And you can do it with just 3. The more you have, the more tonality you're going to be capturing. Now these are all raw files, so just by double clicking on this set of raw files, it's going to bring them immediately over here into Adobe Camera Raw. So now I have these images stacked across the bottom, just like we saw before with stitching. And I'm going to do a shift click to select all of these images. We know they're selected because there's this box around them that we saw before. Now I'm going to simply right click in one of the images that's selected, and instead of going to panorama, I'm going to go to merge to HDR. For those who keep score with keyboard shortcuts, it's Alt and M. So if I choose this, this is going to go and look at the tonality of all 7 images, and it's going to look for the best detail in each, the best tonality in each, and it's going to blend it all together. And it's going to also make a new file, and that new file is going to be a DNG file, as we saw before. It's a digital negative file. And remember, digital negative files are raw files. So anytime you click on a DNG file, it's going to open up Adobe Camera Raw. Now, when you see this triangle up here with the exclamation, it's still working. So you need to be patient and give it time, and that will eventually go away, and then we can do more with the image. I always say it's worth aligning the images. You can do this handheld. If you do it on a tripod, I think it might be a little better. And we can apply some auto settings, which isn't a bad idea just to see how things are looking. But we can certainly go and delete the auto settings, and we can make our own settings however we might want. If you had something in the scene that had motion in it, maybe a tree and the leaves were blowing around a little bit, well, that's where you might want to use the deghost. But in this particular scenario, there wasn't a whole lot moving. It was a pretty calm night. So I'm going to leave that off for now. So I'm going to say merge. So I'll choose this merge, and it's going to tell me Here is the file name. It adopts, I think it's the very first file as the name, and then it'll add HDR. And now this has a 2 just because I've done this once before, but otherwise you wouldn't get the 2. And you can call it whatever name you want, and you can certainly direct it to whatever file you want if you don't want to have it go into the same folder. So I'll just say save, and here is a new file right here, this DNG. Now it's still saving. You can see the little blue bar down here, and there, now we're done. So this is the HDR shot made out of all these 7. Now I can come over here and, just as I could before, go ahead and make some adjustments to this. And the beauty of this now is, as I'm making these adjustments, this is to all of the images. I wouldn't want to go and edit each individual image. It makes a whole lot more sense just to do it right here. And maybe I'll bring up the sharpness just a little. Maybe I could soften this just a little. I don't think dehaze is going to do much, other than if I go in the opposite direction. That's not too bad. Vibrance. Maybe I do want to bring that contrast up just a little. So you see, I'm editing this just like a regular RAW file. By the way, this snow looks pretty blue, doesn't it? I could, just for the heck of it, grab this eyedropper and go gray digging in the scene and say, well, what if that were gray? And that snow probably looks pretty yellow to you, but that snow is actually gray. So that's not too bad. Maybe I back this off just a little bit. And again, I'm thinking I want to bring the highlights down. So I can even come over here to optics. And this is telling me that I shot this with a 70 to 200 millimeter. I'm removing the chromatic aberration. And I'm also using the lens profile. If I take this away, you'll see a minor difference. Yeah, it's very minor. It's a zoom lens, so they're all going to have a little bit of distortion. And so that doesn't look too bad. And from here, maybe what I would do would be just the traditional edge darken. If I bring up effects, just a little bit of edge darkening like that. I could even crop this. Maybe I don't want as much sky. So if I bring this down just a little bit, move this over so we have a little more of the ranch with with that. And I don't know about you, but that looks like it's a little bit crooked. You know, this is a great way to go. If you go to the geometry and use rotate, this is a great way to do stuff. Now I get that tree somewhat vertical. That barn's a little bit better. And I've got constrained crop on, so that's going to automatically crop for me. And maybe I would like to lighten up that foreground just a little bit more. Actually, I've got that all the way up. I can move the blacks up just a little. But you see what we've just done is we've just taken these 7 images and we've just put them together to make this one. And that's high dynamic range, to make it look more the way that our eyes saw it. Cameras are remarkable in being able to capture light, but nothing is as good as our eye. And from here, we would just go ahead and open this. We would assign a size down here. I've just got this to a 4x6. But if I said open, this would just take me right over into Adobe Photoshop. And then I could edit however I might want to go from there. So let's talk about focus stacking. What is focus stacking? Well, sometimes when you take a picture, you might not be able to get everything in focus. So here's a great example. These lobster traps were really close to me, but this lighthouse is pretty far away. So if I focus on the lighthouse, the traps are blurry. Conversely, if I focus somewhere in between, well, now both is blurry. And then if I come all the way to here, now these traps are sharp. And I think if I go one more, this part of this trap is sharp. And if I go one more, now this part of the trap is sharp. I would like to take the sharpest part of this image, of this image, of that image, this image, and that image. And I'd like to put them all together. So I have just the sharpest parts of all of them. So here's how we do it. Again, from Bridge, we're going to select all. Now these happen to be JPEG images. If these were raw files, I would likely open them all in Camera Raw, and I would do whatever processing I might want to do there. But I could also do it after the fact. But for tonight, I'm going to take these 5 JPEG images. Now I'm going to go up to Tools, and I'm going to go to Photoshop, and I'm going to choose Load Files into Photoshop Layers. See how I did that? This is a menu in a menu in a menu. One of the few places where you have to go to like 2 menus. And this is right from Bridge. So again, I went to Tools, then I chose Photoshop as the program in which I want to load these into. And I want to specifically load the files into Photoshop Layers. Now when I click on this, it's going to begin doing that. So here it comes. We open up Layers, and here they all are. Now we know with layers that whatever's on top is hierarchical, so you're not going to see the others, right? So if I shut this little eyeball off, we'll see the next layer under. And there it is. And then if we shut that eyeball off, and then that one, and then finally that one. So you can see that there's the progression of sharpness is getting closer to us. Now it's going to be just the reverse. It's going to go away. There's that one, there's that one, there's that one, and there's that one. Now, there's a big gap between the lighthouse and this. So I didn't bother trying to focus on anything in the middle. Maybe I should have. Let's see. So I'm going to select all these layers. See how they're all gray? All I did was click on the top one, shift click on the bottom one, and these are all selected. Now I'm going to come over here and go to Edit. And the first thing I need to do is come down here to Auto Align Layers. We need to do this first, because if the camera moved at all, this is going to take care of that. But there's another function that happens. With a zoom lens, obviously when you turn the zoom, the image gets bigger or smaller. If you turn the focus, you might not notice the image getting bigger or smaller. But trust me, it does by a minor amount. So I'm going to click on this, and I'm going to choose Auto, and I'm going to say OK. And this is going to put these all together so that they are all in perfect sync. So if you look at the top image, and if I were to unclick this little eyeball, you're going to see that the image doesn't move. And these are all perfectly aligned now. Whereas before, they moved around just a little bit. What I needed to do is just to do that auto alignment. And you'll notice around the edges here, the image actually got a little smaller. Just like stitching, we need to make sure that we give ourselves a little bit of room around the edges so that we're going to crop that out. So now that these are all auto aligned, with these still chosen, what I'm going to do is come over here to Edit, and I'm now going to choose this one called Auto Blend Layers. When I choose Auto Blend Layers, I'm going to say stack the images with seamless tones and colors. These will be pretty much automatically selected for you. I could use this content aware fill around the edges if I wanted to, but I'm not going to worry about that. I'm actually going to crop that. So now I'm just going to say OK, and this is going to go and take the sharpest part of each of those different layers and composite it all to a single one. And there's the result. So whereas before the lighthouse was sharp in one image, but all the traps were blurry in another, what this has just done is it's focus stacked these such that everything is sharp. What's curious is if we look at each one of these images, we can see what Photoshop took from each one. For instance, that's the closest one. Here's the sharpest part of that image. Here's the sharpest part of that one. There wasn't a whole lot in the middle, and we knew that. And then there's the background. And so it took the sharpest part of each of those and put it all together into this one. Now we could go and edit this. We would flatten this. And now we could edit this. We could do sky replacement. We could sharpen it up a little bit. We could even go grade digging because there is, I'm pretty sure, a color cast in this. So here's what I would do next would be to go to layer and I'd just say flatten the image. Now, do you think there's a color cast in there? Let's just draw a little box, shall we, right up in here. And I'm going to go do that Control U. And let's move this out of the way. And I'm going to move this down and, oh, look at that. Yep, definitely there's a color cast out there. So let's just fix for that. I'll just do a Control L, grab this middle eyedropper, and I'm going to say that the side of this lighthouse should be white. And there we go. And I can do a before and after. Here's before, there's after. Now I think that does look a little nicer. Maybe I'll bring this up just a little and touch up the blacks. So again, if I do before and after, to me that does have a color cast to it, and that looks a little bit nicer. So there's an image ready to go, and I would then save this as whatever file format would be required. I'd probably save it as a Photoshop file or TIFF file, or if it's going out for newspaper or something, they might want to have a JPEG. Let's do one more. I happen to have this Siberian iris that I shot, and here the background is in focus, and then as I turned the focus, different parts of the flower became in focus right until I get to that very top one. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to select all. I'm going to go to Tools, go down here to Photoshop, and then I'm going to use Load Files into Photoshop Layers. So here we have these all in the layers. And again, if I take this and shut off each one of these little eyeballs, you see how the flower looks like it's getting closer? And if I go back and do this, it's like it's zooming out.
Yeah.
Well, there is a focal length difference just by turning the focus. This is why we have to do the auto align. So I go up here to edit, and then I come down here to auto align layers. We wouldn't want to do auto blend because it's not going to align properly. And I am going to use auto. I'm not going to worry about vignette or geometric distortion. I don't need that because, again, I'm going to be editing the edges. I shot this with the intent to figure that some of the edges are going to be edited out or cropped out. Now, as I look at this, that flower isn't going anywhere like it did before, but you can see what's happening around the edge. See, the edge is cropping in, but that flower is not zooming like it did before. So now I'm going to come back to Edit, and I'm going to choose Auto Blend Layers, and I want Stack Images. And I could use the Content Aware Fill for the transparent areas, but again, I shot this knowing that I'm going to be cropping out the edges. So I don't need that. It just takes a little more time. So as this processes, it's taking the sharpest part of each of those and it just put them all together. Now, yes, again, the edges are sloppy. We know that. So what we're going to do, just so that there isn't any question here, is I'm going to crop this so that I have just the flowers. Something like that. Now, we don't have to talk about the edges anymore. But the beauty of this is everything is sharp. And if I wanted to lighten this or do any further editing, this is where I would take and I would flatten this, and then I'd have all the facilities of Photoshop to do whatever editing I would want to do at that point. So just to finish this, I would come over here to Layer, and I'd say flatten the image. And then what I might do is if I do Control-Shift-A, that's the shortcut to bring you into Adobe Camera Raw. And what I might just do is, let's see, what does auto do for me? Not too bad. Maybe I would just bring the exposure down just a hair and dehaze, or see, texture is certainly going to make that pop, and so would clarity. And then maybe I just run down here to effects and put a heavy vignette all around the edge, something like that. And then I'll say okay. So I kind of like that, and that really makes those flowers pop. So that is focus stacking with a little touch up on the end. So there are some review items that we've talked about in prior Friday night Photoshops. I hope you enjoyed this. And I look forward to the next time.